In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map that shouldn't exist. It showed the coastline of Antarctica in perfect detail. But here's the thing. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years later. And the coastline he drew? It's what Antarctica looks like beneath the ice. Ice that's been there for millions of years. How did a map maker in the 16th century know what the land looked like without its frozen shell? He claimed he copied it from far more ancient maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Maps that somehow knew what we're only rediscovering now with ground-penetrating radar. That mystery is exactly the kind of thing we're going to sit with today. Because there's something deeply humbling about realizing that the coldest, most remote place on Earth, a continent buried under 2 miles of ice, might be hiding the answer to one of humanity's biggest questions. Were we here before? Not just as scattered tribes, but as something more. Something organized. Something we'd recognize as civilization. And if we were, what happened to us? I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Comment 1 if you're in the US, 2 if you're anywhere else in the world. And if this topic resonates with you, if you find yourself drawn to these kinds of mysteries, a quick like really does help others who think like us discover content like this. Now, I want to be upfront with you. This isn't a quick video. For the next hour and a half, we're going to take a deep dive into Antarctica. Not just the ice and the science, but the anomalies, the ancient maps, the geological evidence, and yes, the uncomfortable questions about what it means if we've been here before and somehow forgot. So if you can, find a comfortable spot. Maybe grab some tea, a blanket, whatever helps you settle in. There's no need to hurry through this. We're going to take our time, follow the breadcrumbs where they lead, and sit with the mystery of it all. Because, whether there was an ancient civilization beneath that ice or not, the journey of asking the question, that's worth every minute. So if Antarctica did harbor an ancient civilization, we need to ask a very practical question. How did they survive? Because let's be clear, Antarctica isn't just cold. It's the most hostile environment on Earth. The coldest temperature ever recorded was negative 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit at Vostok Station. Winds can reach 200 miles per hour. And for months at a time, the sun doesn't rise at all. Modern humans, with all our technology, barely manage it. But here's what's fascinating. We've actually learned quite a bit about surviving extreme cold, both from our current Antarctic operations and from ancient peoples who mastered frozen environments. When you look at what's possible, well, the picture becomes less impossible than you'd think. Let's start with what we know works today. The Amundsen Scott South Pole Station sits literally at the bottom of the world, and it's a masterpiece of survival engineering. The entire structure sits on hydraulic stilts that can be adjusted as snow accumulates beneath it. Because here's the thing, snow doesn't just fall in Antarctica and then blow away. It builds up relentlessly. Without those stilts, the station would be buried within a few years, crushed under the weight of its own frozen tomb. The designers had to completely reimagine what a building could be. Traditional foundations? Useless. The ice sheet moves and shifts. Standard heating? You'd lose more energy than you could ever generate. Every single system had to be rethought from the ground up. Now you might be thinking, ancient people couldn't do that. But hold on. Let's look at what ancient cold weather cultures actually achieved with nothing but natural materials and human ingenuity. The Inuit igloo is one of the most elegant survival technologies ever created. It's made entirely of snow, the very thing you're trying to protect yourself from. The design is brilliant. The dome shape distributes weight perfectly. The entrance tunnel sits below the main floor, creating a cold trap. Since cold air sinks, it stays in the tunnel while warmer air rises into the living space. And snow, counterintuitively, is an incredible insulator. Those tiny air pockets trapped in the ice crystals create a natural barrier. Result: when it's negative 50 degrees outside, the inside of an igloo can reach 60 degrees Fahrenheit, with nothing but body heat and maybe a small lamp. That's a 110-degree temperature difference, created with frozen water and clever engineering. So the question isn't whether ancient people could survive extreme cold. They clearly could. The question is whether they could do it on a civilization-level scale. Not just a hunting party for a few weeks, but cities, generations, a whole society. And this is where Antarctica's hidden features become crucial. Because Antarctica isn't uniformly hostile. Beneath that ice sheet, there's volcanic activity. Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano on Earth, has been erupting continuously since at least 1972. But it's been there, geologically speaking, for much longer. And it's not alone. There are numerous volcanic systems beneath the ice. What does volcanic activity give you? Heat. Geothermal heat sources could have created pockets of habitability, areas where the temperature was not just survivable, but actually pleasant. Where ice naturally melted, creating fresh water. Where the ground itself could be used for heat. You'd build near the warmth. That's just basic survival logic. And here's something we're discovering now. There are massive subglacial lakes under Antarctica. Lake Vostok is the size of Lake Ontario, and it's been sealed beneath 2 miles of ice for potentially millions of years. But it hasn't frozen solid. Why? Geothermal heat from below keeps it liquid. If there were volcanic regions in Antarctica's past, and we know there were, an ancient civilization would have naturally gravitated toward them. They have built their settlements where the earth itself provided warmth, where water flowed naturally, where life was possible. They'd have worked with the environment, not against it. Now, let's talk about building itself. Construction in permafrost presents unique challenges. The ground freezes and thaws, it expands and contracts. Modern engineers struggle with this. We've built structures in Alaska and Siberia that have buckled and collapsed because we didn't account for the ground movement. But there are solutions. You can build on bedrock where possible. You can use materials that flex rather than crack. You can create foundations that float on the surface rather than anchor into unstable ground. Indigenous Arctic peoples figured this out thousands of years ago. Their structures moved with the ice, accommodated the shifts, survived the cycles. An advanced civilization would have learned the same lessons. They'd have developed construction techniques suited to their environment. Maybe they use stone, which handles freeze-thaw cycles better than most materials. Maybe they built partially underground, using the earth itself for insulation and stability. The point is, problems have solutions, and humans are exceptionally good at finding them when survival depends on it. Then there's food. How do you feed a civilization in a frozen wasteland? Well, first, Antarctica wasn't always a wasteland. If we're talking about a time before the final freeze, there would have been ecosystems, plants, animals, a food chain. But even in extreme cold, there are options. Natural refrigeration means food preservation becomes trivially easy. You don't need complex technology to keep food from spoiling when the ambient temperature is below freezing year-round. Ancient Antarctic people would have had access to the world's most reliable food storage system. Just step outside and consider what we know about ancient maritime cultures. They were incredibly sophisticated. Pacific Islanders navigated thousands of miles of open ocean with nothing but the stars and wave patterns. If ancient Antarctans had access to coastlines, which they would have before the ice, they'd have fished. They'd have hunted marine mammals. The ocean is far more productive than frozen land. Modern Antarctic research stations, by the way, still depend on careful planning and resource management. McMurdo Station, the largest research station, houses over 1,000 people during the summer. Everything has to be brought in: food, fuel, equipment. But they make it work because the systems are well designed and everyone understands the constraints. A permanent civilization would have faced similar challenges, but with one advantage: time. Generations to refine the systems, to learn what worked and what didn't, to build a culture around the requirements of survival. And here's what modern attempts at self-sustaining Antarctic habitats teach us. The minimum requirements for civilization are surprisingly modest. You need shelter. You need heat. You need water. You need food. Everything else is, technically, optional. If you can meet those 4 needs consistently, you can build everything else. Art, science, philosophy, all the things that make a civilization more than just survival. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the essentials are so simple, but the execution so challenging. That humans have always been just a few good solutions away from making the impossible work. So could an ancient civilization have engineered survival in Antarctica? Well, they'd have needed to be clever. They'd have needed to work with the environment rather than against it. They'd have needed geothermal advantages and coastal access, and deep knowledge of cold weather survival. But none of that is impossible. We've seen humans adapt to deserts, jungles, Arctic tundra, high mountains. We've seen indigenous cultures thrive in places that seemed uninhabitable until they showed us how. The engineering of survival comes down to this: understanding your environment completely and then building solutions that work with it rather than against it. Whether anyone actually did this in ancient Antarctica, we still don't know. But the more we learn about what's possible, the less impossible it seems. Human ingenuity has a way of surprising us. And perhaps that ingenuity didn't start with us. Perhaps we're not the first builders on this planet. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Because when we start talking about ancient Antarctica, there's one name that keeps surfacing. One legend that refuses to fade. Atlantis. You've heard the story, I'm sure. The lost civilization. The advanced society that vanished beneath the waves. For centuries, people have searched the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, even the Caribbean. What if they've been looking in the wrong place entirely? Let's go back to the source. Plato. Around 360 BCE, he wrote about Atlantis in 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He described it as a powerful civilization that existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That's the Strait of Gibraltar, for those keeping track. Beyond the known world. And here's what's interesting. Plato said it was opposite the known world. Not just west. Opposite. If you're standing in Greece and you draw a line through the earth to the opposite side, you don't hit the Americas. You hit something else. You hit the South Polar region. Charles Hapgood noticed this back in the 1950s. He was a professor at Keene State College, and he developed what he called Earth crust displacement theory. The idea was simple, but radical. The Earth's crust, he argued, could shift suddenly over the molten interior, like the skin of an orange rotating around the fruit inside. That happened. A place that was once temperate could end up at the pole, and a place at the pole could shift to a more hospitable latitude. Now, mainstream geology doesn't support this theory. At least not the way Hapgood described it. But the core question remains valid. Could Antarctica have been in a different position? Could it have been warmer? The answer, as we explored earlier, is yes. We know Antarctica was ice-free. We know it had forests. The question isn't whether it was habitable. The question is whether anyone was there to inhabit it. Plato's Atlantis was described as a naval power, advanced in engineering and architecture. They had canals, harbors, and concentric rings of land and water protecting their capital. They mined precious metals. They had abundant resources. And then, according to the story, they became corrupted by their own power and greed. Sound familiar? That's the karmic thread we traced in part 3. They took too much. They gave back too little. And they paid the price. The gods, Plato wrote, sent earthquakes and floods. In a single day and night, Atlantis sank beneath the sea and vanished. But here's where it gets even more interesting. That same story, that pattern of destruction, appears everywhere. Aboriginal Australians have flood stories. So do the Sumerians, the Aztecs, the Norse. Nearly every ancient culture has a myth about a great deluge that wiped out the world before ours. Graham Hancock has spent decades investigating this. His theory, controversial but meticulously researched, suggests these aren't separate myths. They're cultural memories of the same event, a global cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. And he proposes that before this catastrophe, there was a source civilization, an advanced culture that seeded knowledge around the world before being destroyed. Where was this source civilization? Hancock points to Antarctica. Consider the evidence he assembles. Megalithic sites around the world, from Egypt to Peru to Easter Island, show remarkably similar construction techniques. Massive stones fitted together with precision that challenges modern engineering. Astronomical alignments that suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. And they all seem to point back to a common source of knowledge. The Peary Rise map we mentioned earlier shows Antarctica's coastline as it would have appeared without ice. But it was drawn in 1513, long before Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. Where did that knowledge come from? The map itself includes a note saying it was compiled from older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. Then there are the ancient Greek texts themselves. They speak of a land at the edge of the world where the gods kept their knowledge. A place of wisdom and power, but also danger. The ends of the earth, they called it. And at the ends of the earth, there was ice. You see where this is going. Antarctica fits the Atlantis description in ways that no Mediterranean location ever has. It's genuinely beyond the known world of the ancient Greeks. It could have been temperate and habitable during the last interglacial period. It would have had access to mineral resources. If it was destroyed by a sudden climate shift, the speed of that destruction matches Plato's account of Atlantis vanishing in a single day and night. Now, I'm not saying this proves Atlantis was Antarctica. I'm saying it's worth considering. It's worth asking why we've been so focused on finding Atlantis in places where it doesn't quite fit, when there's a continent-sized possibility we've barely begun to explore. Following the Atlantis-Antarctica theory is like being an architect studying building techniques across different cities, noticing they all learned from the same master builder, whose original workshop has been demolished. You see the echoes of that original knowledge in structures built thousands of miles apart. But the source, the origin point, is hidden, or in this case, frozen. And here's the beautiful part. Whether or not Atlantis was real, whether or not it was in Antarctica, the legend itself tells us something important. It tells us that humans have always known, on some deep level, that civilizations can fall. That hubris and greed lead to destruction. That taking without giving back brings catastrophe. Plato wasn't just telling a story. He was issuing a warning. And if that warning came from cultural memory of a real civilization that fell, then it's a warning we desperately need to hear. The ancient Greeks understood something we're only beginning to relearn. Balance matters. Karma is real, whether you call it karma, or ecology, or simple cause and effect. What you take, you must repay. What you destroy, you must restore. And if you don't, the earth will correct the imbalance for you. So maybe Atlantis wasn't in the Mediterranean after all. Maybe it's sleeping under 2 miles of ice, waiting for us to find it. Or maybe it's waiting for us to learn the lesson it tried to teach before it's too late. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That we might not be the first to reach this level of advancement. And that we might not be the first to face the choice between sustainability and self-destruction. The ice keeps its secrets, but the story keeps calling to us. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The ice is melting, and that changes everything. Now, before you think this is another lecture about climate change, stay with me. Because what's happening in Antarctica right now is creating something we've never had before. For the first time in millennia, the frozen archive is beginning to open its pages. You see, Ice retreat along the Antarctic coastline isn't just an environmental concern. It's an archaeological opportunity. Areas that have been buried for thousands of years are being exposed to sunlight for the first time in human history. It's like climate change is slowly, methodically removing the dust sheets from furniture in a sealed room. We didn't ask for this reveal, but it's happening anyway. And here's the fascinating paradox. The very thing that threatens to destroy potential evidence is also the thing that's finally letting us see it. Melting ice exposes ancient surfaces, but then weathering begins immediately. Wind, water, freeze-thaw cycles. They all start breaking down whatever's been preserved the moment it's uncovered. We're in a race. We didn't even know we were running until the starting gun went off. But we're not entering this race empty-handed. Technology available to us right now would seem like pure magic to explorers just 20 years ago. Ice-penetrating robots that can navigate subglacial lakes autonomously. Ground-penetrating radar systems so refined they can distinguish between different types of rock formations through 2 miles of ice. And perhaps most powerful of all, artificial intelligence that can analyze satellite data and spot patterns the human eye would never catch. Think about that for a moment. We're teaching machines to look at Antarctica and identify anomalies, things that don't fit the expected geological patterns. Straight lines where there should be curves. Right angles in places where nature typically avoids them. Symmetrical formations that statistical models say shouldn't exist naturally. And they're finding things. In the 2020s, detailed mapping has revealed formations beneath the ice that have scientists quietly asking questions they're almost afraid to voice out loud. Nothing conclusive. Nothing that makes the front page. But enough to warrant further investigation. Enough to make people wonder. One research team detected what appears to be a massive geometric structure buried under the ice near the Transantarctic Mountains. Another found magnetic anomalies suggesting metallic deposits arranged in patterns. These aren't smoking guns, but they're also not nothing. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Private companies, the same ones racing to Mars, are starting to look south instead of up. Why send robots to another planet when Earth's most unexplored continent sits right here, waiting? Technological challenges are similar. Extreme cold, remote operations, autonomous systems. But Antarctica has one advantage Mars doesn't. Whatever's down there, it's from here. Some of these companies are developing ice drilling technologies that could reach bedrock in weeks rather than years. Others are working on submersible robots designed for subglacial lakes, environments that are simultaneously the closest thing to an alien ocean and potentially home to ancient evidence. The space race and the ice race are using the same playbook. And the timeline is surprisingly similar. Because here's something most people don't realize. The next 20 to 30 years represent a genuinely unique window in human history. The ice is melting fast enough to expose new areas, but not so fast that everything's destroyed before we can study it. Technology is advanced enough to investigate properly, but the international treaties haven't been completely rewritten yet to restrict or corporatize access. It's a Goldilocks moment. Too early, and we couldn't see anything. Too late, and either the evidence will be weathered away, or the politics will have become completely impossible to navigate. Right now might be just right. Think of Antarctica today like a house slowly revealing itself as snow melts from the roof. You're finally getting glimpses of the structure underneath. But if you wait too long to investigate, the exposure to elements might damage exactly what you're trying to study. You have to move carefully, but you also have to move. The scientists understand this. There's a quiet urgency in Antarctic research circles that wasn't there a decade ago. Not panic, not desperation, just the recognition that time matters. In a way, it hasn't before. And it's not just about finding ruins or artifacts, though that's the dramatic possibility everyone imagines. It's about understanding what happened. The ice cores being extracted right now are time machines. They hold atmospheric data going back hundreds of thousands of years. It can tell us not just that the climate changed, but how fast and in what sequence. If a civilization existed during Antarctica's last warm period, and then suddenly faced catastrophic freezing, those ice cores would show us the timeline. We could see how long they had, whether it was centuries of gradual cooling they might have adapted to, or a climate shift so rapid that adaptation was impossible. That knowledge matters for more than just solving ancient mystery. It matters for us, for right now, because whatever caused Antarctica to freeze could happen again. Not there necessarily, but somewhere. Understanding Earth's capacity for rapid climate shift isn't academic curiosity. It's survival information. But here's what keeps me up at night, in a good way. What if we don't have to drill through 2 miles of ice? What if the evidence is already being revealed along the coasts, in the areas that are melting first? What if someone walking along a newly exposed Antarctic shoreline stumbles across something that shouldn't be there? A tool, a structure, a clear sign of human hands at work. It could happen tomorrow. It could be happening right now, and we just haven't processed the images yet. Satellites photograph Antarctica constantly. Thousands of square miles of new surface exposure every year. That's a lot of data. A lot of pixels. A lot of places where something might be waiting to be noticed. The ice kept its secrets perfectly for thousands of years. But it's starting to talk. Not in a language we fully understand yet. Not with clear answers. But it's talking. And we're finally in a position to listen. The archive is opening. The question is, are we ready for what it might contain? And perhaps more importantly, are we ready to learn from it? Because if the ice has preserved evidence of a civilization that fell, whether from their own mistakes or from forces beyond their control, that's not just history. That's prophecy. That's warning. That's instruction manual. The next few decades will tell us things about our planet, and maybe about ourselves, that we've never known before. The tools are ready. The opportunity is here. The ice is melting. All we have to do is look. The ice is melting. All we have to do is look. But when we look, what timeline are we actually examining? You know what's interesting? For most of the 20th century, if you'd told an archaeologist that humans built massive stone temples 11,000 years ago, they'd have laughed you out of the room. Textbooks were clear. Civilization began around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. Before that, hunter-gatherers. Simple tools. Survival mode. Then, in 1994, a Kurdish shepherd in southeastern Turkey noticed some strange stones sticking out of a hill. What they found beneath that hill changed everything. Göbekli Tepe, a site so old, so sophisticated, it shouldn't exist according to what we thought we knew. Massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals, arranged in precise circles, built with astronomical alignments that suggest a deep understanding of the cosmos. And here's what made archaeologists drop their coffee. It was built 11,600 years ago. 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Before the pyramids. Before the wheel, for crying out loud. The people who built this weren't supposed to be capable of it. They were supposed to be scattered bands of nomads, just figuring out agriculture. One discovery. One shepherd noticing some rocks. And suddenly, we had to rewrite 6,000 years of human history. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Because Göbekli Tepe isn't an isolated case anymore. In the past few decades, we've found site after site that pushes back our timelines. The Sphinx water erosion hypothesis suggests it might be thousands of years older than Egyptologists claim. Underwater structures off the coast of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean hint at civilizations swallowed by rising seas. Ancient astronomical knowledge encoded in monuments that supposedly primitive people had no business understanding. It's like being an architect who discovers that the house you're living in is actually built on top of another house. And maybe that house is built on top of another one. The foundation you thought was bedrock? It's just someone else's ceiling. The pattern keeps repeating. Discovery, resistance, eventual acceptance. When the first Neanderthal skull was found in 1856, scientists dismissed it as a deformed modern human. Too threatening to the narrative. When Alfred Wegener proposed continental drift in 1912, geologists mocked him for decades. The idea that continents move? Absurd. Except it wasn't. This is how paradigm shifts work. The establishment protects the accepted story until the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. It's not malicious, it's human nature. We build careers, write textbooks, construct entire frameworks of understanding. Changing that foundation feels dangerous. But here's what we need to understand. Resistance to new ideas in academia isn't proof that those ideas are wrong. Sometimes it's just proof that they're challenging. So let's apply this to Antarctica. The mainstream archaeological timeline says civilization as we know it, agriculture, architecture, writing, emerged around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, right after the last ice age ended. Perfect timing, really. The ice retreats, the climate warms, and humans suddenly get organized. But what if that's not the beginning? What if it's just the most recent beginning? The Pleistocene epoch lasted for 2.5 million years. During that time, there were repeated cycles of glaciation and warming. Some interglacial periods lasted tens of thousands of years, plenty of time for civilizations to rise, flourish, and fall, leaving almost no trace. Think about it this way. If our current civilization collapsed tomorrow and ice sheets covered the northern hemisphere, what would remain after 50,000 years? Cities would crumble. Our plastics might survive, but scattered and buried. Our greatest monuments would be worn to stumps. Future archaeologists, digging through the ice, would find fragments, anomalies, things that don't quite fit their models. They'd probably dismiss most of it. The possibility of multiple cycles of civilization doesn't contradict science. It contradicts our assumptions. There's a difference. And Antarctica? Antarctica presents the perfect test case. Here's the thing. You can't disprove the existence of a pre-ice Antarctic civilization using our current evidence, because we haven't looked under the ice properly. It's like saying there's no foundation under your house because you've only examined the living room floor. 2 miles of ice is an incredibly effective eraser of history. It's also an incredibly effective preserver. If something's down there, it's in better condition than almost anything else we've ever found. Frozen in time. Waiting. Time. Now, I need to be clear about something. There's a crucial difference between pseudoscience and legitimate alternative hypotheses. Pseudoscience ignores evidence that contradicts it. It starts with a conclusion and works backward. It makes claims without proposing testable methods. A legitimate alternative hypothesis does the opposite. It says, here's some anomalous data, here's a possible explanation that fits the data, and here's how we could test it. It invites investigation rather than demanding belief. The Antarctic civilization theory, approached properly, falls into that second category. We have anomalous data, ancient maps showing ice-free coastlines, geological evidence of rapid climate change, unexplained formations beneath the ice. We have a hypothesis. Perhaps a civilization existed there before it froze. And we have a testable method. Investigate beneath the ice with better technology. That's not pseudoscience. That's just science we haven't done yet. The ice-penetrating radar has shown us geometric formations. Satellite imagery has revealed unusual features. But we need more. Better robots. Deeper drilling. More comprehensive mapping. And you know what? We are getting there. The technology that didn't exist 20 years ago exists now. The political will that seemed impossible is beginning to shift as climate change makes Antarctica more accessible and more urgent. Questions that seemed fringe are entering mainstream consideration. History has taught us this much. When we assume we know the full story, we're usually wrong. When we think we've reached the limits of discovery, we're usually standing on the edge of something bigger. The shepherd who found Göbekli Tepe wasn't looking for a civilization that would rewrite archaeology. He was just looking at some rocks. Sometimes that's all it takes. Antarctica's ice has protected its secrets for millennia. But ice doesn't last forever. Especially not anymore. What we find beneath it won't just tell us about the past. It'll tell us about the possibilities we've been ignoring, the timelines we've been too certain about, the stories we haven't yet imagined. And maybe, just maybe, it'll remind us that the history of human civilization is longer, stranger, and more resilient than we ever gave it credit for. The question isn't whether we should look. It's what we'll do when we finally see what's been hidden all along. The question isn't whether we should look. It's what we'll do when we finally see what's been hidden all along. But here's the thing. What if we never see it? What if the ice keeps its secrets forever? Would that make this entire journey meaningless? I don't think so. There's something valuable about questions that don't have answers. Something important about mysteries that remain unsolved. It's uncomfortable, sure. We're trained from childhood to seek closure, to find the right answer, to fill in the blank and move on to the next problem. But life doesn't always work that way. Think about it like this. You're living in a house with a locked room. You don't have the key. You might never have the key, but you know something's in there. Maybe it's treasure. Maybe it's just old furniture. Maybe it's empty. Does not knowing ruin your experience of the rest of the house? Or does it add something? A sense of depth, of possibility. A reminder that there's always more to discover, even in familiar spaces. That's what the Antarctic mystery gives us. Whether or not there was ever a civilization beneath that ice, the theory itself serves a purpose. It's a thought experiment, a mirror held up to our own society. When we imagine an advanced Antarctic culture collapsing under its own weight, we're really asking, could that happen to us? When we picture their cities frozen in time, we're wondering, what will remain of our cities? When we speculate about their mistakes, we're cataloging our own. Lost civilization stories have captivated humans for thousands of years. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mois. They appear in culture after culture, era after era. Why? Because they let us rehearse our fears in safe ways. They let us explore what happens when civilization fails without actually experiencing that failure. They're warning systems built into our collective imagination, but they're also hope systems. If civilizations fell before and humanity survived, if people rebuilt, started over, eventually thrived again, then maybe we're more resilient than we think. Maybe collapse isn't the end, just a transformation. The Antarctic theory carries both messages, the warning and the hope, wrapped in ice, waiting. Now, here's where intellectual humility comes in. Those are the three hardest words to say in any language. I don't know. We live in an age of instant information. Google can answer almost anything in seconds. We've gotten used to certainty, having answers, to feeling like we understand. But the truth is, we don't understand most things. Not really. We don't know how consciousness works. We don't know if we're alone in the universe. We don't know what happens after death. We don't know why there's something instead of nothing. And we definitely don't know everything about our own planet's history. Saying I don't know isn't weakness. It's accuracy. It's honesty. The real skill is staying curious after you've admitted ignorance. Holding the question without demanding an immediate answer. Being comfortable with uncertainty while still searching for truth. That's what good science does. It says, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's how we might find out. The Antarctic mystery lies in that third category. We don't know what's under the ice, but we might find out. Eventually. And here's the beautiful part. Mystery itself drives progress. Why did humans explore the oceans? Because we didn't know what was out there. Why did we reach for space? Because we didn't know what was up there. Every great discovery in history started with someone looking at the unknown and thinking, I wonder. Questions we can't answer today become the breakthroughs of tomorrow. 100 years ago, we couldn't see beneath the Earth's surface. Now we have ground-penetrating radar. 50 years ago, we couldn't sequence DNA. Now we can clone animals and edit genes. 20 years ago, we couldn't explore Mars. Now we've got rovers sending back photos daily. Technology follows curiosity. We build the tools we need to answer the questions we're asking. So if we're asking what's beneath Antarctic ice, we'll eventually build better ice-penetrating robots, improved drilling systems, more sensitive detection equipment. Mystery itself justifies the search. But there's another truth we need to accept. Some questions might not be answered in our lifetime. Technology might take longer than we expect. The political barriers might prove insurmountable. The ice might be too thick, the conditions too harsh, the logistics too complex. We might die without ever knowing for certain. And that's okay. Think about the astronomers who spent their lives studying the cosmos before we had telescopes powerful enough to see distant galaxies. They never got to see what we can see now. But their questions, their observations, their careful measurements laid the groundwork for everything that came after. We're part of a conversation that spans generations. That's what we're doing here. Adding our voices to a discussion that started long before us and will continue long after we're gone. The scientists measuring Antarctic ice today are building on work done by explorers a century ago. And they're creating the foundation for discoveries that won't happen for another century. It's a relay race. We run our portion, pass the baton, and trust that someone will carry it forward. There's something deeply humbling about that, and something deeply beautiful. We don't have to solve every mystery ourselves. We just have to keep the questions alive. Living with the Antarctic mystery is like owning a house with a locked room. You can't see inside. Maybe you never will. But knowing it's there changes how you experience everything else. Every room you can enter becomes more interesting because you know there's more. Every wall you can examine reminds you that walls can hide things. Every foundation you walk on makes you wonder what's beneath. Mystery adds dimension to the known. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's exactly what we need. In a world that pretends to have all the answers, that sells certainty like it's a product, that promises you can understand everything if you just click here and subscribe, in that world, embracing mystery is almost radical. It's saying, I don't need to know everything. I can live with questions. I can sit with uncertainty and not panic. That's a skill worth developing, because life is full of locked rooms, full of questions we can't answer, full of mysteries that outlive us. We can rage against that. Demand answers the universe isn't ready to give. Convince ourselves we know more than we do. Or we can settle into wonder. Let curiosity be its own reward. Find peace in the search itself. The Antarctic ice isn't going anywhere quickly. Whatever secrets it holds, if it holds any, they've waited this long. They can wait longer. We'll keep asking questions. Keep developing technology. Keep pushing at the boundaries of what we know. And one day, maybe decades from now, maybe centuries, someone will finally break through that ice and see what's underneath. They'll owe that moment to everyone who asked before them. Everyone who wondered. Everyone who refused to stop being curious just because answers were difficult. That's the real treasure beneath the ice. Not ancient ruins or lost civilizations, but the reminder that mystery itself has value. That not knowing is part of being human. That questions can be more powerful than answers. And that some rooms are worth keeping locked, at least for now, because the wondering itself makes us better. So maybe the real gift isn't finding an answer. Maybe It's learning to live with the question itself. Because here's the thing about Antarctica. It's not going anywhere. It'll still be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and 1,000 years from now. The ice will keep its secrets as long as it needs to. And somehow, that's oddly comforting. Why does this frozen continent, more than any other place on Earth, continue to capture our imagination? Generation after generation, we're drawn to it. We tell stories about it. We wonder about it. We dream about what might lie beneath all that white silence. It's a paradox, really. The coldest place on Earth generates the warmest speculation. The most inhospitable landscape becomes the most inviting mystery. You'd think we'd be more fascinated by tropical jungles where we could actually survive, where life explodes in every direction. But no, we're captivated by the ice. Maybe that's because Antarctica represents something we desperately need to believe. That we're part of a longer, grander story than the one we've been told. That human history isn't just a simple line from caves to cities, from stone tools to smartphones. That there might be chapters we've forgotten, pages torn out of our collective memory. The idea of a lost Antarctic civilization, whether it's real or not, gives us something important. It tells us that if civilizations have fallen before, humanity has always found a way to rise again. We're resilient. We adapt. We survive. That's comforting when you look around at the world today and wonder about our own future. But here's the other side of that comfort. The warning. If they fell, if that hypothetical civilization collapsed beneath the ice, we need to ask ourselves why. And if the answer involves greed, imbalance, taking without giving back, then we're looking at more than just a historical curiosity. We're looking at a mirror. Do you see it? Antarctica as a mirror. We see in its ice whatever we need to see about ourselves and our own choices. Some people see proof of ancient wisdom lost to time. Others see natural geological formations and nothing more. Some see government conspiracies. Others see scientific caution. But maybe what we're all really seeing is our own reflection. Our own fears about what happens when civilizations lose their way. Our own hopes that knowledge might survive disaster. Our own questions about whether we're making the same mistakes that doomed whoever or whatever came before. That's the karmic lesson embedded in this whole theory, isn't it? If an ancient Antarctic civilization fell because of greed and imbalance, because they took more than they gave, consumed more than they created, then we're being offered a choice right now. We can recognize that pattern. We can choose differently. We can learn from mistakes made thousands or millions of years ago, even if we never find a single artifact to prove they happened. Or we can ignore the warning. We can keep mining, keep consuming, keep competing, keep taking. And we can find out firsthand what happens when the karmic debt comes due. It's sobering, but it's also empowering in a way, because it means we're not locked into any predetermined fate. We can write a different ending to our chapter of Earth's story. Now, here's the simple truth, and it might be the most important thing we can say about all of this. Whether or not an ancient civilization actually existed in Antarctica, whether we ever find proof or never find anything at all, this mystery serves a purpose. It reminds us how much we still don't know about our own planet, about our own past, about ourselves. We've mapped the surface of Mars in more detail than we've mapped the seafloor. We've sent probes to the edges of our solar system, but we can't see through 2 miles of Antarctic ice. We've decoded ancient languages and split the atom and landed on the moon. But we can't definitively answer the question, was Antarctica ever home to human civilization? It's humbling. And that humility, that recognition of how much we don't know, might be exactly what we need right now. Because when you think you know everything, when you're absolutely certain your version of history is complete and correct, you stop asking questions. You stop exploring. You stop wondering. And the moment we stop wondering, we stop growing. Antarctica won't let us stop wondering. It stands there at the bottom of the world, vast and white and silent, holding mysteries we can't access, keeping secrets we can't crack. It's an invitation, written in ice. Come find out. Come discover. Come wonder with me. And maybe that's why it calls to us so persistently. Not because we expect to find definitive answers, but because we need questions. We need mysteries that can't be solved with a quick internet search. We need unknowns that require patience, and technology we haven't invented yet, and international cooperation, and decades of careful investigation. We need something bigger than ourselves to reach toward. So, the call of the ice endures. It's there in the back of our minds when we read about climate change and melting ice sheets. It's there when we see satellite photos showing new coastal areas exposed for the first time in millennia. It's there when a new technology is developed that might, just might, let us see a little deeper, a little clearer through all that frozen water. The wondering itself is valuable. The curiosity itself is precious. The willingness to say I don't know, but I want to find out is perhaps the most fundamentally human trait we possess. And you know what? Future generations might answer the questions we can't. Technology that seems impossible today will be routine tomorrow. Methods we haven't conceived of yet will become standard practice. And maybe 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, someone will finally drill through the ice or navigate the underwater landscape or analyze the radar data in just the right way. And they'll find something. Or they won't. Either way, they'll ask new questions. They'll wonder about new mysteries. Because that's what we do. It's what we've always done. So tonight, when you're falling asleep, maybe you'll think about Antarctica. That frozen continent at the bottom of the world. That blank space on the map that isn't really blank at all, but full of possibilities. Full of maybes and what-ifs and perhapses. Maybe you'll imagine ancient footsteps preserved beneath the ice. Or maybe you'll simply appreciate the fact that such places still exist. Places where we don't have all the answers. Places where mystery remains. Either way, keep wondering. Keep questioning gently. Keep being curious about the world beneath your feet and the history behind your present. Because Antarctica isn't done with us yet. And we're certainly not done with Antarctica. The ice keeps calling. And as long as humans are humans, we'll keep answering that call. One question at a time. One wonder at a time. One mystery that makes us look up at the stars, or down at the earth, and think, what if? That's enough. That's everything, really. The wondering itself makes us better. We've been traveling this incredible road together, haven't we? Asking questions that reach back through time, challenging what we think we know about our own story. That journey, it's brought us to the edge of perhaps the greatest mystery on Earth. A place so vast, so untouched, that it holds secrets we can't even begin to imagine. Antarctica. Now, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a continent bigger than Europe, bigger than the United States. Nearly 6 million square miles of land, locked beneath ice so thick it would take you 2 miles straight down to reach solid ground. That's not just cold, that's a frozen vault. A geological time capsule that's been sealed for millions of years. And here's what gets me every time I think about it. We've explored more of the moon's surface than what lies beneath that ice. We've sent rovers to Mars, dove to the deepest ocean trenches, mapped distant galaxies. But what's directly beneath 2 miles of Antarctic ice? We can only guess. It's right here on our own planet, and it remains almost completely unknown. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map. Nothing unusual there. Cartographers had been making maps for centuries. But this map showed something that shouldn't have been possible. It depicted Antarctica's coastline. Not the ice-covered edge we see today, but the actual rocky coastline beneath all that ice. The mountains, the bays, the geography that wouldn't be confirmed by modern science until the 1950s, with ground-penetrating radar. Think about that for a moment. How did a 16th century mapmaker draw Antarctica's true coastline? A coastline that's been hidden under ice for thousands of years? Peary Rice himself noted he'd compiled his map from older sources, some dating back centuries, maybe millennia. So where did that knowledge come from? Who mapped Antarctica before the ice? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. And that's exactly what makes it so compelling. Then there's Admiral Richard Byrd. February 1947. Operation High Jump. The United States Navy launched what they called a research expedition to Antarctica, the largest expedition ever mounted there. 13 ships, 33 aircraft, 4,700 personnel. That's not just research, that's a full-scale military operation. Byrd kept journals during that expedition, and some of the entries are strange. He described flying over areas that shouldn't exist, green valleys in a land that should be nothing but ice, warm water lakes. He wrote about seeing things that didn't match any scientific understanding of Antarctica. Now, whether you take those journals literally or see them as something else, exhaustion, optical illusions, classified reconnaissance, the fact remains, something about that expedition raised questions that have never been fully answered. And perhaps that's intentional. But let's step back and think about what we're really dealing with here. 2 miles of ice. You know what that means? Perfect preservation. Think of it like discovering a sealed storage unit from your great-great-grandparents. Everything inside has been protected from air, from moisture, from decay. Whatever went into that storage unit, that's how it'll remain, until someone finally breaks the lock. Antarctica's ice is that lock. And whatever lies beneath, whether it's just ancient rock formations and fossils, or something far more extraordinary, it's been kept in pristine condition, frozen in time, waiting. Here's the beautiful paradox of it all. The coldest place on Earth might hold the warmest secrets of human history. The thought that sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? Not from the cold, but from possibility. This is why Antarctica has captivated us for so long. Explorers risk their lives to reach it. Scientists dedicate careers to studying it. Conspiracy theorists obsess over it. Because unlike other ancient mysteries where we can dig, where we can excavate and analyze, Antarctica keeps its secrets behind an impenetrable barrier. It's not that we don't want to look. We physically can't. Not easily. Not yet. That ice is like a wall between us and our past. And walls like that, they make us wonder what's on the other side. You know what I find most intriguing? It's not any single piece of evidence. It's the pattern. The Peary Rice map. T. Byrd's expedition. The ancient texts from cultures worldwide mentioning lands of ice and mystery. The geological evidence that Antarctica wasn't always frozen. These dots exist. They're real. The question is whether they connect, and what picture emerges if they do. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe Antarctica's ice covers nothing but rock and ancient lakes, beautiful in their own right, but holding no human story. And that would be fine. That would be an answer. But maybe, just maybe, there's something else down there. Something that would completely rewrite what we think we know about human civilization. About how far back our story really goes. About who came before us and what they might have achieved. And here's the thing. We won't know until we look. Really look. Not with flyovers or surface-level scans, but with the technology and determination to go deep. To break through that ice. See what's been waiting there for thousands, maybe millions, of years. Antarctica doesn't give up its secrets easily. It demands patience. It demands better technology than we have right now. It demands cooperation between nations that don't always cooperate. It demands that we care enough about the question to pursue the answer, even if that answer takes decades to find. And we do care. That's why you're here, listening to this. That's why I'm here, telling you about it. Because some mysteries are worth pursuing, even when, especially when, they seem impossible to solve. As we stand on the shore of this frozen continent, looking out across endless white, we're really standing at the edge of human knowledge. Behind us, everything we think we know. Before us, everything we might discover. And between us and those discoveries, 2 miles of ice, holding the line between past and future. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? What if Antarctica isn't just a frozen wasteland at the bottom of the world? What if it's a library, a museum, a memory we've forgotten how to access? What if everything we're about to explore together, all the evidence, all the questions, all the possibilities, what if it all points to something extraordinary beneath that ice? Well, there's only one way to find out. We keep asking. We keep looking. We keep wondering. And we start by understanding what Antarctica once was, before the ice came. Let me take you back in time. Not hundreds of years. Not thousands. We're going millions of years into the past, when Antarctica looked nothing like the frozen wasteland we know today. Because here's something that might surprise you. Antarctica wasn't always covered in ice. In fact, for most of its existence, it was green. Between 40 and 14 million years ago, Antarctica was temperate. Trees grew there. Rivers flowed. Life thrived in forests that stretched across the continent. This isn't speculation or theory. It's scientific fact, backed by decades of research and tangible evidence pulled from the rocks themselves. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Antarctica hasn't always been where it is now. Go back far enough, and you'll find it was part of something much larger. A supercontinent called Gondwana. Picture this. Around 180 million years ago, Antarctica was connected to South America, Africa, India, and Australia. They were all one massive landmass. And Antarctica? It wasn't at the bottom of the world. It was much farther north, sitting in a temperate zone where the climate was mild enough for forests to flourish. Might be wondering how we know this. Well, scientists have found the proof frozen in time. Fossilized tree stumps, pollen samples preserved in rock, leaf impressions that show us exactly what kinds of plants once grew there. These aren't just fragments. We're talking about evidence of entire rainforests, ecosystems as rich and diverse as anything you'd find in South America or Southeast Asia today. Understanding ancient Antarctica is like renovating an old house and discovering original features beneath layers of additions. Each layer tells you when changes happened and what the structure looked like before. And what we found beneath Antarctica's ice tells an incredible story. But continents don't stay put. Over millions of years, Gondwana broke apart. The pieces drifted across the globe like ships leaving a harbor, each heading in different directions. South America moved west. Africa moved north. India crashed into Asia, creating the Himalayas. Australia drifted northeast. And Antarctica? It drifted south, all the way to the bottom of the world. Now, being at the South Pole doesn't automatically mean you'll be covered in ice. Location matters, but it's not the only factor. What really sealed Antarctica's fate was something that happened about 34 million years ago. The Drake Passage opened. This is the stretch of ocean between the southern tip of South America and Antarctica. When these two continents finally separated completely, ocean water could flow freely between them. And that changed everything. The opening of the Drake Passage created what scientists call the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. It's a massive ring of ocean water that flows around Antarctica, completely encircling it. This current acts like a barrier, preventing warm water from the north from reaching the continent. Antarctica became isolated, cut off from the warming influence of tropical and temperate ocean currents. The result? The entire continent began to cool. Rapidly. Ice started forming at the poles, then spread outward. Within a few million years, Antarctica transformed from a green forested land into the ice-covered continent we know today. But here's what keeps researchers up at night. That transformation wasn't instant. There was a window, a period of transition, when parts of Antarctica were still habitable, even as the ice advanced. Some areas remained ice-free until about 14 million years ago. In certain coastal regions and valleys, pockets of temperate climate might have persisted even longer. Which brings us to a question that sounds almost absurd at first. Could an advanced civilization have existed during Antarctica's last warm period? Now, before you dismiss this entirely, let's consider what we're actually asking. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have only been around for about 300,000 years. 14 million years ago? We didn't exist. Not even close. Our distant ancestors were still small primates living in trees. So no, humans as we know them couldn't have built cities in ancient Antarctica. The timeline doesn't work. But what if we looked at it from a different angle? What if we asked a different question? Not whether humans were there, but whether intelligence could have been there. Earth's climate has gone through dramatic cycles. Ice ages come and go. Continents shift. Conditions that support life appear, disappear, and reappear in different places. We've recently discovered that civilization is far older than we once thought. Sites like Göbekli Tepe have pushed back the timeline of human achievement by thousands of years. What we're really asking is this: in Earth's vast history, could there have been windows of time when conditions aligned perfectly? When a landmass had the right climate, the right resources, and enough stability for intelligence to emerge and develop? Antarctica had forests. It had rivers. It had a climate capable of supporting complex life for millions of years. That's not a brief window. That's an enormous span of time. And here's the thing about evolution and intelligence. They don't follow neat schedules. Life finds a way to adapt to whatever conditions exist. In temperate Antarctica, what could have evolved? What might have developed in those forests, along those rivers, in the millions of years before the ice came? We can't know. The ice is too thick. The evidence, if it exists, lies buried under 2 miles of frozen water. The question itself is worth asking, because it reminds us how dynamic our planet really is. Earth doesn't stay still. Climates shift. Land masses move. What's frozen today was green yesterday. What's underwater now was once dry land. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That entire chapters of Earth's story might be hidden beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered. Or perhaps never discovered at all. What we do know for certain is this: Antarctica was green. Life flourished there. And then, in what amounts to a geological eye blink, everything changed. The ice came, and it buried whatever was there beneath a frozen blanket that has lasted millions of years. The continent became a time capsule. Anything caught in that transition would be preserved perfectly, frozen in place, waiting. Which means if there was something there, anything at all, it's still there now, under the ice. But here's the thing about discoveries frozen in time: they force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Not just about what was there, but about why it might have ended. Let's talk about something that might sound unusual for a documentary about ancient civilizations. Let's talk about karma. Now, before you think we're veering into pure philosophy, stay with me. Because karma, in its original sense, isn't about mystical, cosmic justice. It's about causality. It's about consequences. And when we look at how civilizations fall, that's exactly what we're seeing: consequences playing out across generations. Eastern philosophy, there's this principle that every action plants a seed. That seed has to grow. It has to bear fruit. Maybe not today, maybe not in your lifetime, but eventually. And here's the sobering part. When you're talking about civilizations, those seeds get planted by thousands, millions of people, and the harvest comes due all at once. Imagine an advanced Antarctic civilization during that warm period we talked about. Let's say they thrived for thousands of years. They built cities, developed technology, created art and culture. But what if their downfall didn't come from some external catastrophe? What if it came from within? From their own choices accumulating like snow on a roof, until suddenly, catastrophically, everything collapsed. This is where we need to look at a pattern that repeats throughout human history. It's the pattern of taking more than you give back. Think about it like this. You inherit a house from your grandparents. It's beautiful, sturdy, well-maintained. But instead of taking care of it, you start tearing down walls on the ground floor to build an addition on the second story. You're mining the foundation for materials to expand upward. At first, it works. You've got more space. You're feeling pretty clever. But eventually, the math catches up with you. The whole structure comes down. That's what happens when societies prioritize extraction over cultivation. When they choose greed over balance. When competition becomes more important than sustainability. We've seen this happen. Easter Island, they cut down every single tree. Maya, they pushed their agricultural system beyond what the land could support. These aren't myths or theories. These are documented collapses, and the pattern is always the same. Take, 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 without giving back, and the earth stops giving. So imagine our Antarctic civilization doing exactly this. Mining minerals faster than the earth can regenerate them. Harvesting forests before saplings can mature. Building bigger, grander, more impressive structures, each generation trying to outdo the last. Consuming more than they're producing. It's not evil exactly. It's just human. And here's where the karma principle becomes terrifyingly clear. You can't continuously take from the earth without eventually paying the price. The imbalance corrects itself. It has to. That's not mysticism. That's physics, ecology, systems theory. Every system seeks equilibrium, and when you push it far enough out of balance, the correction is violent. But it's not just about resource depletion. There's another pattern that destroys civilizations from within: competition without cooperation. Picture city-states across ancient Antarctica, each one trying to outcompete the others. Arms races, resource wars, wasteful displays of power and wealth. Technology advancing, not for the benefit of all, but for the advantage of some. Sound familiar? This is the trap. Technological advancement without ethical advancement. You get better and better tools, more and more power, but the same old human drives, greed, fear, the need to be on top. And those better tools, they just make the destruction more efficient. In Buddhism, there's this concept of hungry ghosts. They're beings with enormous bellies and tiny mouths. They're desperately hungry, constantly consuming, but they can never be satisfied. It's a metaphor, obviously, but it's a perfect metaphor for unsustainable civilizations. Always expanding, always consuming, never satisfied, never at peace. And here's what keeps me up at night. We're seeing the same pattern today. Same choices. The same trajectory. We're mining rare earth metals faster than we can recycle them. We're harvesting forests faster than we can replant them. We're dumping carbon into the atmosphere faster than it can be absorbed. We're competing for resources instead of cooperating to manage them sustainably. We've got incredible technology, genetic engineering, nuclear power, but have we developed the wisdom to use it responsibly? That's the karmic question. That's the seed we're planting right now. So when we speculate about an ancient Antarctic civilization, we're not just playing with alternative history. We're holding up a mirror. If they existed, and if they fell, what destroyed them might be exactly what's threatening us now. There's this tipping point in any system. You can stress it for a while. You can push it out of balance, and it'll try to compensate, try to adapt. There's always a threshold. Cross it, and the correction isn't gradual anymore. It's sudden. It's catastrophic. It's irreversible. For Antarctica, maybe that correction was climate change. Maybe their environmental destruction triggered feedback loops they couldn't stop. Maybe the same competition and resource depletion that weakened them, made them unable to respond when the climate shifted. And then the freeze came, fast, final, preserving everything in ice like Pompeii in ash. Or maybe it's even simpler than that. Maybe civilizations carry the seeds of their own destruction from the very beginning. Maybe the same drives that push us to build and explore and innovate. Those same drives, unchecked, unbalanced, push us toward collapse. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the greatest threat to any civilization might not be external. It might be internal. It might be us. But here's the thing about karma that people often miss. It's not predetermined. Those seeds you plant, you get to choose what kind they are. Every generation gets to choose whether they're planting seeds of balance or imbalance, sustainability or extraction, cooperation or competition. If an ancient Antarctic civilization fell because of greed and imbalance, we don't have to repeat that pattern. We can learn from it. We can choose differently. That's why these mysteries matter. Not just because we want to know what happened to them, but because their story, real or imagined, might help us write a different ending to our own. The ice remembers everything. And maybe what it's remembering, frozen and preserved beneath those miles of snow, is a warning. But if the ice remembers, how do we read its memory? That's where things get truly fascinating. Because we're not completely blind down there. We have ways of seeing through the ice. And what we've been seeing over the past few decades has raised more questions than it's answered. Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to inspect your home's foundation, but you can't access the basement. The door's sealed shut, maybe welded closed decades ago. So, what do? You use sonar, thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar. You're working with echoes and reflections and inference, rather than direct observation. That's exactly what we're doing in Antarctica. And the echoes coming back? They're strange. In the early 2000s, ground-penetrating radar surveys started detecting something unexpected beneath the ice. Geometric structures. Now, before we get carried away, geometric doesn't automatically mean artificial. Nature creates plenty of geometric patterns. Crystals, basalt columns, fault lines. They can all look suspiciously regular. But here's the thing. These formations are massive. They're arranged in ways that make geologists pause and say, that's unusual. Are they cities? Pyramids? Ancient foundations? Or are they just really interesting rock formations that happen to scatter radar in peculiar ways? We don't know. We can't know. Not without drilling down there and taking a look. And drilling through 2 miles of ice to reach the bedrock below. That's not just difficult. It's almost impossible with current technology. So for now, we're left with data. Mysterious, tantalizing, frustratingly incomplete data. Now, let me tell you about Lake Vostok. This is real, documented, absolutely fascinating. Beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, there's a lake. Not a small lake. A lake the size of Lake Ontario. About 160 miles long, 30 miles wide, buried under more than 2 miles of ice. It's been sealed off from the rest of the world for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. Just isolated. Completely cut off from sunlight, from fresh water, from the surface world. And yet, when scientists finally managed to drill down and take samples, they found microbial life. Life that's been evolving in complete darkness and isolation for millions of years. Now here's where your imagination gets to run a bit. If life can exist in Lake Vostok, what else might exist in the hundreds of other subglacial lakes we've discovered? What adapted to those dark waters? What survived the freeze? But more than that, if you wanted to hide something, truly hide it from the world, we're better than beneath miles of ice at the bottom of the planet. Then there are the pyramids. In 2013, satellite imagery and aerial photographs revealed formations in the Ellsworth Mountains that look, well, They look like pyramids. Perfect triangular peaks, remarkably symmetrical, standing in formation. The official explanation? They're pyramidal peaks formed by glacial erosion. When ice grinds away at a mountain from multiple sides, it can create sharp, pyramid-like shapes. It happens. Mountains aren't always smooth and round. But take a look at the photographs yourself sometime. They're eerily regular. The angles are consistent. The spacing seems intentional. Maybe they're natural. Probably they're natural. But that word probably does a lot of heavy lifting. We do know for certain is that Antarctica has been hit hard. Ice core samples and geological surveys have revealed ancient impact craters beneath the ice. Big ones. The kind that would have caused global climate catastrophes. The kind that could flash freeze an entire continent if the conditions were right. One impact in particular, possibly around 12,800 years ago, right when the Younger Dryas event flash cooled the entire planet, shows signs of hitting the Antarctic ice sheet. Some researchers think it might have even penetrated through to the bedrock. If there was a civilization there at the time, if there were cities and farms and people going about their lives, they would have had almost no warning. One moment, normal life. The next moment, impact. And then, the freeze. It's like Pompeii, but frozen instead of buried in ash. Everything preserved exactly as it was in that final moment. And then, there are the magnetic anomalies. During aerial surveys in the 1990s and 2000s, magnetometers detected unusual readings beneath the ice. Strong magnetic signatures that could indicate metallic objects. Or they could indicate mineral deposits, iron ore, magnetite, arranged in unusual geological formations. Without excavation, we're just guessing. But the pattern of these anomalies doesn't quite match what we'd expect from natural mineral deposits. They're too concentrated, too localized, too organized. Here's the frustrating reality. Drilling through 2+ miles of ice isn't like drilling through rock or soil. Ice moves. It flows. It's technically a fluid, just an extremely slow one. So you can't just drill a hole and expect it to stay open. The ice closes in around your drill. It fights you every inch of the way. And when you finally reach the bottom, you're working blind. You can't send people down there. The pressure, the cold, the isolation. It's one of the most hostile environments imaginable. You're working with robots and remote sensors, trying to explore a space you'll never see with your own eyes. It's like trying to perform surgery through a keyhole while wearing oven mitts. In the dark. You might technically be able to do it, but the precision and clarity you need? Really impossible. So everything stays hidden. The geometric structures, whatever's causing those magnetic anomalies, anything that might be resting on the bedrock beneath Lake Vostok, it's all sealed away, protected by the most effective security system on Earth. Miles and miles of flowing, crushing, impenetrable ice. And maybe that's by design. Maybe the ice isn't just preserving what's down there. Maybe it's protecting it. Or protecting us from it. Now, I know what you're thinking. This all sounds like speculation piled on top of mystery, wrapped in uncertainty. And you're right. That's exactly what it is. We're reading shadows and calling them shapes. We're interpreting data and hoping we're not seeing what we want to see. Here's the thing about shadows. They're cast by something real. These radar returns, these magnetic anomalies, these geometric formations, something's causing them. Something's down there, whether it's ancient civilization or just really interesting geology. The question isn't whether there's something beneath Antarctic ice. There definitely is. The question is what that something is, and whether we'll ever be able to find out before the ice decides to reveal its secrets on its own timeline. Because that ice is melting. Slowly now, but accelerating. And when it finally melts enough to expose what's underneath, we'd better be ready for whatever we find. Or don't find. The basement door is starting to open, whether we're ready or not. Here's the thing about basements. Sometimes you don't need to go through the door to know what's down there. Sometimes you can look through the windows. Or in Antarctica's case, you can look at what's underwater. Because while we've been focused on what's beneath the ice, there's another archive hiding in plain sight. Well, not plain sight exactly. More like freezing darkness, hundreds of feet below the surface of the Southern Ocean. And that's where things get truly fascinating. You see, when scientists started mapping Antarctica's continental shelf with sonar, essentially creating underwater blueprints of the ocean floor, they found something unexpected. River systems, drainage networks, the unmistakable signatures of ancient waterways that once flowed through valleys and plains, now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of seawater. Think about what that means for a moment. Rivers need land to flow across. These weren't underwater currents. These were actual rivers, with banks and deltas and all the features you'd expect. Which means at some point in history, all of that was above water. Dry land. Potentially habitable land. Now, here's where the timeline becomes critical. During the last ice age, sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower than they are today. That's not a small difference. That's the height of a 40-story building. When you drop sea levels that much, you expose massive stretches of continental shelf, land that's been underwater for more than 10,000 years. And we've seen this story play out before. There's a place called Doggerland, a land bridge that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. For thousands of years, it was inhabited. People lived there, hunted there, built communities there. Then the ice melted, the seas rose, and it vanished beneath the North Sea. Erased from the map. But here's what's remarkable. We found evidence of Doggerland. Fishing trawlers have pulled up ancient tools, weapons, even fragments of dwellings from the ocean floor. We know people lived there because the evidence survived submersion. So, the question becomes, what survived beneath Antarctic waters? In the 1990s, researchers detected something peculiar off the coast of Queen Maud Land. Linear features. Geometric patterns on the ocean floor that looked, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, that looked suspiciously like roads. Or pathways. Straight lines running parallel to the ancient coastline, intersecting at regular intervals. Now, before we get carried away, let's be honest about what we're dealing with. Underwater sonar can be tricky. Natural geological processes can create patterns that look artificial. Lava flows, sediment deposits, tectonic activity. All of these can produce shapes that seem too regular to be natural. But that's exactly what makes this interesting. Because the researchers who found these features, they weren't looking for ancient roads. They were mapping the continental shelf for geological surveys. They found the patterns by accident. And when something unexpected shows up in data you're collecting for completely different reasons, it deserves a closer look. The problem is, looking closer is nearly impossible. Imagine you're trying to examine the foundation of a house, but the basement is flooded with ice-cold water. It's pitch black, and you're not allowed to pump the water out or bring in proper lighting. That's essentially what we're dealing with here. Searching for underwater Antarctic ruins isn't just difficult, it's operating at the absolute edge of what current technology can handle. Water temperature alone is a massive barrier. Antarctic waters hover around -2 degrees Celsius. That's below the normal freezing point of water. It only stays liquid because of the salt content. Equipment fails. Batteries die. Human endeavors can only survive minutes, even in the most advanced protective gear. Then there's the ice itself. Massive icebergs break off from the continental shelf constantly, making underwater navigation incredibly dangerous. And even if you could safely deploy submersibles or remotely operated vehicles, visibility is often near zero. Water is filled with suspended particles, glacial silt that's been ground down to powder over millennia. But let's say you somehow overcome all of that. Let's say you develop technology that can systematically explore the Antarctic continental shelf. You still run into the final barrier, international law. The Antarctic Treaty doesn't just restrict what you can do on land. It governs the surrounding waters too. Any major archaeological expedition would require approval from multiple nations, environmental impact studies, and justification that would satisfy 54 different governments with different priorities and different ideas about what should or shouldn't be explored. It's frustrating, isn't it? To know that answers might be sitting right there, a few hundred feet underwater, perfectly preserved by the cold, and we simply cannot get to them with our current resources and regulations. And then there are the sounds. In 2014, researchers analyzing acoustic data from Antarctic waters picked up something they couldn't explain. A repetitive sound, almost mechanical in its regularity. They nicknamed it the bioduct because it was organic sounding enough to be biological, but structured enough to seem artificial. After years of analysis, they eventually attributed it to Antarctic minke whales, a species we barely understand because they're so difficult to study in their natural habitat. Mystery solved, right? Except acoustic researchers will tell you there are other sounds down there. Anomalies that don't fit known biological or geological sources. Low-frequency pulses, rhythmic patterns that appear and disappear. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and Antarctic waters keep them better than most. Now, I'm not suggesting these sounds are evidence of anything ancient or artificial. What I am saying is this: we've barely begun to listen. We've mapped less than 10% of Antarctica's continental shelf in any detail. The rest is educated guesswork based on scattered data points. Compare that to how we study other underwater archaeological sites. The Mediterranean has been explored exhaustively. The Caribbean, the North Sea, coastal waters around every inhabited continent. We've sent divers and submersibles and spent decades piecing together underwater history. But Antarctica? We've sent a handful of expeditions, collected some sonar data, and called it a day. It's like owning a house and never checking the crawl space. You know there's more structure down there. You know water flows through pipes you've never seen. But you've decided the conditions are too difficult, the access too restricted, so you just don't look. The underwater evidence, whatever it might be, sits waiting. River systems that once carved through valleys, coastal plains that may have supported life, linear features that could be natural or could be something else entirely. All of it preserved in freezing darkness, protected by water temperature that would kill you in minutes and international agreements that make systematic exploration virtually impossible. The question isn't whether there's something worth finding down there. The question is whether we'll ever develop the technology, the resources, and the international cooperation needed to actually look. And whether we'll do it before the evidence, if it exists, gets buried under new sediment, broken up by shifting ice, or lost to the same geological forces that have been reshaping Antarctica's coast for thousands of years. The underwater archive is there. We know it's there. We just can't read it yet. And maybe, just maybe, memories of it survived in the oldest stories humans ever told. You see, there's something fascinating about oral traditions. We tend to think of them as fuzzy, unreliable, like a game of telephone played across centuries. But that's not quite right. And information matters. When it's about survival, about who you are, about where you came from, humans develop remarkably precise ways to preserve it. Aboriginal Australians have stories. Stories about the frozen lands to the south. Not metaphorical. Not poetic. Geographic.I. They describe a place of eternal ice, far beyond the known world. These stories have been passed down for thousands of years, long before European explorers ever reached Antarctica. Long before anyone with writing systems documented its existence. Now, how do you explain that? The Maori people of New Zealand speak of Hawaii. It's their ancestral homeland, the place their people came from before they arrived in Aotearoa. For generations, scholars assumed this was purely mythological, a spiritual concept rather than a physical place. But when you look at the descriptions, something interesting emerges. A land to the south, a place that was once warm, once fertile, but became uninhabitable. A place their ancestors had to leave. What if Hawaii wasn't invented? What if it was remembered? It gets stranger. Ancient Egyptian texts, we're talking thousands of years old, mention in their cosmology a land of ice and knowledge at the edge of the world. The Sumerians, too. In their creation myths, they reference a frozen realm where wisdom originated before being brought to warmer lands. These are cultures separated by thousands of miles, with no known contact. Yet, they're describing something remarkably similar. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. We now have proof, scientific proof, that oral traditions can preserve accurate geographical information for over 10,000 years. Aboriginal Australian stories describe the coastline before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. They talk about land bridges that existed, islands that are now underwater, specific geographical features that were submerged 10,000 years ago. They're right. Archaeologists have confirmed it. The stories weren't corrupted. They weren't distorted beyond recognition. They were preserved with stunning accuracy across 400 generations of retelling. Think about that for a moment. 400 generations. That's like your family passing down the exact layout of a house, room by room, from ancestor to descendant, from the Bronze Age to today, and having it still be accurate. So when these same traditions speak of frozen lands to the south, of ancestral homes that became ice-locked, of wisdom that came from a place now unreachable, should we dismiss them as fantasy? Or should we at least consider the possibility that they're remembering something real? The Chinese have their legends too. The Kunlun Mountains, a paradise at the edge of the world, the source of all wisdom. In these stories, it's described as a place where immortals lived, where knowledge flowed like water, where civilization reached heights the world wouldn't see again for millennia. But here's the thing. The geographical descriptions don't quite match any known mountain range in China. They describe it as being at the absolute limit of the world, beyond which no one could travel. What if the edge of the world wasn't north into the mountains? What if it was south, toward the only place on Earth that truly was, and still is, beyond reach? Now, there's a theory in psychology called the collective unconscious. Carl Jung proposed it. The idea is that certain memories, certain archetypes, are somehow shared across all of humanity. Not because we learn them, but because they're inherited, embedded in our psyche. It's controversial. Most scientists are skeptical. But it would explain something puzzling. Why do cultures with no contact, separated by oceans and millennia, tell such similar stories? Why do flood myths appear on every inhabited continent? Why does nearly every ancient culture have a legend of a lost golden age, a civilization that fell, a paradise that was destroyed? Maybe it's just how human psychology works. We invent the same stories because we have the same fears, the same hopes, the same narrative structures in our brains. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps some researchers up at night, maybe these aren't inventions at all. Maybe they're fragments, echoes of something that actually happened, preserved in the only medium available before writing, story. Consider this. When a civilization falls, what survives? Not the buildings, those crumble. Not the technology, that's lost when the people who understand it die. Not the written records, those burn, rot, wash away. But stories? Stories told around fires, passed from parent to child, woven into the fabric of identity? Those can survive anything. They survive because they matter, because they're about us, about who we were, where we came from, what we lost. If an Antarctic civilization existed and met a catastrophic end, the survivors, those who made it to warmer lands, would have brought their stories with them. Stories of the frozen homeland, stories of the knowledge that was lost, stories of why it fell, told as warnings to future generations. And over thousands of years, those stories would change. They'd become mythologized, embellished, woven into new cultural contexts. The specific details would blur. But the core, the emotional truth, the geographical anchor, that could remain. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the oldest stories we tell might not be stories at all. They might be history. Fractured, filtered through countless retellings, but history nonetheless. We can't prove this, of course. We can't point to a single myth and say definitively, this is a memory of Antarctica. The evidence is circumstantial, tantalizing but not conclusive. We also can't dismiss it, because oral traditions have proven to be far more reliable than we ever gave them credit for. They've preserved accurate information across time spans that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. So when cultures around the world speak of a frozen land of knowledge, of an ancestral home lost to ice, of wisdom that came from the south before the world changed, we should listen. Not with blind belief, but with the same curiosity that drives all good exploration. Because sometimes, the oldest maps aren't drawn on paper. They're drawn in memory, passed down in the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And those maps might be pointing us towards something buried beneath 2 miles of ice. Something we're only just beginning to remember. We imagine civilizations fading slowly, don't we? A gradual decline. Resources dwindling over centuries. Cities emptying one generation at a time. But that's not always how it happens. Sometimes, the end comes fast. Violently fast. And when we look at Antarctica through the lens of geology, we're not seeing a slow freeze. We're seeing evidence of catastrophe. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Because the ice cores tell us something unsettling. Antarctica didn't gradually cool over millions of years in its most recent transition. The data shows it could have frozen, completely frozen, in as little as 100 years. Think about that. 1 century. That's the span from your great-grandparents to you. In geological terms, it's a blink. A light switch flipping off. Ice cores drilled at Vostok Station and other sites reveal these sudden climate shifts preserved in layers, like a frozen record book. And what they show us are moments when temperatures didn't slide, they plummeted. When atmospheric composition didn't gradually change, it crashed. If a civilization existed during one of these shifts, they wouldn't have had time to adapt, to migrate, to save themselves. They would have been frozen in place. So what could cause something like this? What force could lock an entire continent in ice within a human lifetime? One theory gaining serious attention is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. About 1800 years ago, evidence suggests a comet or asteroid struck Earth, or more accurately, exploded in our atmosphere over North America. The resulting debris field would have triggered immediate climate collapse. Global temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of years. The circumpolar winds around Antarctica would have intensified. The freeze would have accelerated. And anything living there would have been caught in the sudden cold like insects in amber. It's like trying to inspect your home's foundation without being able to enter the basement. Actually, no. Let me give you a better comparison. Understanding Antarctica's rapid freezing is like studying a house after a pipe burst. You need to trace the initial break, the catastrophe, to understand why every room, every corner, the entire structure was affected so quickly. 1. Failure. Cascading consequences. And here's what makes this even more compelling. We see volcanic evidence too. Antarctica sits on top of significant volcanic activity. We know of massive eruptions in its geological history. Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano on Earth, has been erupting continuously for over 1 million years. But it's not alone. Beneath the ice, researchers have identified at least 138 volcanoes. And in 2017, they discovered evidence of a volcanic rift system under the ice sheet that could dwarf anything we see on the surface today. Imagine a civilization living through a major volcanic event. The ash cloud alone would block sunlight. Temperatures would drop. Crops would fail. But in Antarctica's case, the volcanic eruption might have triggered something worse, a feedback loop. Less sunlight means more ice. More ice means more sunlight reflected away. More reflection means even colder temperatures. A single butterfly effect. It's that simple. And that terrifying. The geological community has long debated two competing ideas about how Earth changes. Uniformitarianism says changes happen slowly, gradually, predictably. Catastrophism says sudden, violent events reshape everything in moments. For most of the 20th century, uniformitarianism won. It felt safer, more scientific, more predictable. But we keep finding evidence that catastrophism is real. The dinosaur-killing asteroid, the Toba supervolcano eruption that nearly wiped out early humans 74,000 years ago, the sudden flooding that carved the channeled Scablins in Washington state. Earth's history isn't a gentle slope. It's a staircase with sudden drops. And Antarctica shows us both. Millions of years of gradual cooling, yes, but punctuated by moments of rapid catastrophic change that would have ended any civilization unlucky enough to be there. We have a perfect example of how this works: Pompeii. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it didn't give warnings. It didn't evacuate the city over decades. It buried everything in a matter of hours. And because it happened so fast, Pompeii was preserved. Bread still in the ovens. The bodies frozen mid-stride. The graffiti on the walls still readable. Sudden disaster preserves. If Antarctica froze rapidly, and the evidence suggests it did, then anything built there would be preserved exactly as it was in that final moment. No gradual decay. No time for nature to reclaim the structures. Just frozen. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the very catastrophe which might have destroyed an ancient civilization could also be the thing that preserved it for us to eventually find. Ice cores also show us something else. They reveal periods of extreme instability, moments when the climate wasn't just cold or warm, but oscillating wildly. Imagine trying to build a civilization when the temperature swings 20 degrees in a decade, when ice advances and retreats unpredictably, when the growing season becomes impossible to predict. These aren't stable conditions for any society, no matter how advanced. And here's where it connects to that karmic thread we explored earlier. What if an ancient Antarctic civilization contributed to their own climate instability? We know from ice cores that CO2 levels and temperature are linked. If they industrialized, if they burned through resources without understanding the consequences, they might have destabilized their own climate system. Then the natural catastrophe, the comet impact, the volcanic eruption, would have hit a civilization already weakened by their own choices. The final push over the edge. Nature doesn't wait for us to get our act together. It corrects imbalances when they become too severe. Whether that correction takes 1,000,000 years or 100 doesn't change the outcome for those caught in it. The geological record is patient. It waits under the ice, layer upon layer, preserving the truth of what happened. Every volcanic ash layer, every temperature spike, every moment of catastrophic change. We're reading it now, slowly, carefully. And what it's telling us is that Antarctica's transformation from green continent to frozen wasteland wasn't a gradual fade. It was punctuated by moments of violence that would have been absolutely catastrophic for anything living there. Which means if we ever do find evidence of a civilization under that ice, we might find it frozen mid-moment, preserved by the very disaster that ended it. The question isn't whether catastrophes can happen. We know they can. We've seen the evidence across our planet. The question is, were they there when it did? To answer that, we need to ask a different question first. Could humans have even reached Antarctica in ancient times? The answer might surprise you. About 14,000 years ago, humans arrived at Monteverde in southern Chile. the southernmost tip of South America. We have the archaeological evidence, stone tools, hearths, the remains of their settlements. And from there to Antarctica? It's only 600 miles across the Drake Passage. That's roughly the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Not exactly next door, but not impossible either. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating, because we've dramatically underestimated ancient maritime capabilities. For decades, we assumed early humans hugged coastlines, afraid of open water. But the evidence keeps proving us wrong. Humans reached Australia at least 50,000 years ago. That required crossing open ocean. Indonesia's islands, even at their closest, weren't connected by land bridges. Early humans built boats, real ocean-going vessels, tens of thousands of years before we gave them credit for. They navigated by stars, by wave patterns, by the flight of birds. They weren't primitive. They were incredibly sophisticated. So when we look at Antarctica sitting just 600 miles from South America, suddenly it doesn't seem so unreachable, does it? Ancient human migration is like watching a construction crew work outward from a central point. They move systematically, adapting their tools and techniques to each new terrain. And eventually, they reach every buildable space. Why would Antarctica be the one place they never tried? Especially when we know humans had already mastered extreme cold environments. Bering Strait crossing happened during the last ice age. Humans walked from Siberia to Alaska across frozen land, surviving temperatures that regularly dropped below -40 degrees. They hunted woolly mammoths in blizzards. They built shelters from snow and animal hides. They figured out how to keep fire alive in howling winds. Cold didn't stop them. It just made them more creative. In Siberia, archaeologists have found 30,000-year-old bone needles. Eyed needles. The same design we use today. These weren't for casual sewing. They were for making weather-tight clothing with sinew thread. Survival gear. The kind of clothing that could keep you alive in Antarctic conditions. We found elaborate ivory carvings in sites where temperatures never rose above freezing. Art. Not just survival, but culture thriving in the cold. And here's what those artifacts tell us. Humans don't just survive harsh environment. We adapt. We innovate. We make them home. The Norse did exactly this in Greenland. They established settlements that lasted 500 years in one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. They raised cattle, grew barley in short summers, built churches, and traded with Europe. Not just surviving, living, creating a civilization. And Greenland's conditions? Remarkably similar to what Antarctica's coastal regions would have been during warmer periods. If the Norse could do it with medieval technology, what could an older, unknown civilization have achieved with thousands of years to adapt? But what if we looked at it from a different angle? What if the real question isn't whether they could reach Antarctica, but whether we'd find evidence if they did? This is critical to understand. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially under 2 miles of ice. Think about it. If a city existed on the Antarctic coast 15,000 years ago, and the continent then froze over, where would its artifacts be now? Under ice, under ocean, under sediment that's been grinding and shifting for millennia. We've explored less than 1% of what lies beneath Antarctic ice. Working with sonar and radar, trying to piece together shapes through solid ice. It's like trying to find the original blueprints of a house in a flooded basement with the power out. You know things might be down there, but the conditions make systematic exploration almost impossible. And even in more accessible places, we keep finding things we missed. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was discovered in 1994. It pushed back the timeline of civilization by 6,000 years. It had been there the whole time, just buried under dirt on a hill farmers had been walking over for centuries. If we can miss an 11,000-year-old temple complex in Turkey, a place we've been studying for generations. What might we be missing under Antarctic ice? Archaeological record is full of gaps. Not because nothing happened in those gaps, but because preservation is rare and discovery is hard. For every Pompeii that gets frozen in time, there are dozens of civilizations that simply weathered away, leaving almost nothing behind. Wood rots. Fabric disintegrates. Even stone erodes. In most environments, you'd be lucky to find anything after 10,000 years. But Antarctica, something's under that ice. It's been in a freezer. Protected. Waiting. The question isn't really whether ancient humans could have adapted to Antarctic conditions. We know they could adapt to anything. From the Sahara to Siberia, from sea level to high altitude, humans figured it out. The question is whether they had time. Whether they had opportunity. Whether Antarctica was habitable long enough for a civilization to take root before the catastrophe we discussed earlier swept through. We simply don't know yet. But what we do know is humbling. Ancient humans were more capable, more adventurous, and more sophisticated than we ever imagined. Every decade, new discoveries push back what we thought were limits. They crossed oceans we said couldn't be crossed. They survived in places we said were too harsh. They built structures we said required technology they didn't have. They kept surprising us. So when someone asks, could humans have reached Antarctica? The answer isn't no. It's, why wouldn't they have? Humans go everywhere. It's what we do. We see a horizon and we walk toward it. We see water and we build a boat. We feel cold and we invent better clothing. Antarctica was there, visible from South America on clear days. Ice-free coasts would have been inviting during warmer periods. The resources, seals, penguins, fish, abundant. If it was habitable, someone probably tried to live there. Whether they succeeded long enough to build something worth finding, that's still frozen in the ice, waiting for us to develop the technology and the will to look properly. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the story of human exploration might include a chapter we haven't read yet. One that's been preserved in perfect condition, archived in the coldest library on Earth. And maybe, just maybe, we're finally ready to start turning those frozen pages. But here's something you might not have considered. Even if compelling evidence exists beneath that ice, we might never be allowed to dig it up. Because Antarctica isn't just frozen. It's locked down. In 1961, 12 nations did something remarkable. They signed the Antarctic Treaty, essentially agreeing to leave an entire continent alone. No military bases. No weapons testing. No territorial claims could be enforced. Today, 54 nations have signed on. It's one of the most successful international agreements in human history. But why? The official story makes sense. Antarctica is pristine, scientifically valuable, and keeping it demilitarized prevents Cold War tensions from literally going to the ends of the earth. It's a noble idea, a continent devoted entirely to peace and science. Yet, there's an interesting wrinkle in that story. The treaty came just 14 years after Operation High Jump. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. In 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd led the largest Antarctic expedition ever mounted. 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and nearly 5,000 personnel. The official mission? Mapping and establishing a research base. But the scale suggests something more urgent. This wasn't a research trip. It was a military operation. And it was cut short. Scheduled for 6 months, the expedition returned after just 8 weeks. Admiral Byrd's journals, depending on which versions you believe, describe strange discoveries. A land beyond the pole. Advanced technology. Things that didn't fit the narrative. Then came Operation Deep Freeze in the 1950s. More military presence. More flights over the interior. More silence about what they found. You see, Antarctica's political situation is like owning a house with 50 other people. Any renovation or investigation requires unanimous agreement, so even obvious repairs or explorations can be blocked indefinitely. And that's exactly what happens. If ground-penetrating radar detected structures beneath the ice, and it has, excavating them would require international consensus. Good luck getting 54 nations to agree on anything, let alone something that could rewrite human history. China wants one thing, Russia wants another. The United States has its interests. Every nation with Antarctic research stations has a voice and a veto. But there's a deeper question here. Would governments want to find evidence of an ancient Antarctic civilization? Think about it. Our entire understanding of human history rests on a specific timeline. Agriculture developed 12,000 years ago. Cities emerged 5,000 years ago. Civilization progressed in a neat, linear fashion from primitive to advanced. School textbooks, museum exhibits, entire academic careers are built on this framework. Now imagine discovering irrefutable proof that an advanced civilization existed in Antarctica 100,000 years ago, or 200,000. The implications aren't just historical, they're philosophical, religious, political. It challenges who we think we are, where we think we came from. Some narratives are too valuable to risk. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. There are practical reasons for governments to prefer mysteries remain buried. National identity often depends on historical claims. What if Antarctica proves certain cultures were more advanced than believed, or less advanced than claimed? What if it reveals inconvenient truths about human capability, about cycles of rise and fall? It's not even necessarily sinister. It's human nature. We construct stories about ourselves, and evidence that contradicts those stories feels threatening. But there's another layer to this. Corporate interest. Antarctica isn't just ice. Beneath that frozen surface lie vast mineral deposits, rare earth elements, oil, resources worth trillions. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits mining, but that treaty isn't permanent. It can be renegotiated. And every year, as those resources become scarcer elsewhere, the pressure to reconsider grows. Scientific research stations? They're also surveying, mapping, assessing. When someone finally proposes drilling or mining operations, they'll need to know exactly where the valuable deposits are. If archaeological evidence happens to be in those same locations, well, excavation equipment looks remarkably similar whether you're digging for artifacts or minerals. It's a delicate balance. Keep Antarctica protected, but maintain your stake for when protections inevitably weaken. Now, does this mean there's a vast conspiracy to hide ancient ruins? Probably not. Conspiracy requires coordination, and governments are usually too disorganized for that. What's more likely is a series of individual decisions, each reasonable on its own, that collectively create a wall of secrecy. One nation finds something interesting, but decides not to share. Why help competitors? Another classifies research for national security reasons. A third simply doesn't fund the excavation because the political complications aren't worth it. Before long, you have functional secrecy without anyone orchestrating it. It's like Area 51, isn't it? That infamous military base in Nevada. Decades, the government denied it existed, fueling wild speculation about alien spacecraft. The reality turned out to be mundane, testing classified aircraft. But the secrecy created something more powerful than truth, mythology. Antarctica might be experiencing the same effect. Legitimate reasons for limited access, harsh conditions, international treaties, scientific protocols get interpreted as cover-ups. Maybe some of them are. Maybe some aren't. The problem is, once secrecy becomes the norm, you can't tell the difference. When does secrecy serve legitimate purposes versus fueling speculation? It's genuinely difficult to say. Protecting delicate scientific research makes sense. Preventing a mad rush to claim Antarctic resources seems wise. But at what point does restriction become suppression? Here's what we know for certain. If someone did find compelling evidence of ancient Antarctic civilization, announcing it would be complicated. They'd need permission from their government, clearance from international bodies, cooperation from other nations. They'd face skepticism from the scientific community, and rightfully so, given the extraordinary nature of the claim. They'd navigate competing interests, political pressures, and quite possibly threats to their career. It's easier, much easier, to stay quiet. Note the anomaly in a classified report. To mention it to colleagues over drinks, but never publish. To let the mystery remain mysterious. So Antarctica stays frozen in more ways than one. Physically locked beneath miles of ice. Politically locked beneath layers of international law. Institutionally locked beneath academic inertia and career concerns. Even if we wanted to explore, even if we had the technology and funding, even if every government suddenly agreed, there's still the practical reality. Large-scale excavation in Antarctica is nearly impossible under current international law. The environmental protections are stringent, and for good reason. Disturbing the ice sheet could have unpredictable consequences, which means any ancient civilization beneath that ice isn't just hidden. It's protected. Ironically, thoroughly protected from discovery. The frozen continent keeps its secrets, not just because of nature, but because we've chosen, collectively, to let it. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? We like to believe truth always comes to light. That humanity's curiosity cannot be contained. That secrets eventually surface. But maybe some mysteries persist not because they're impossible